Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Location: Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve, Kansas. Date: August 23, 2016. The grass moved like something breathing. Samantha Vance stood on the front porch of the Spring Hill Ranch house, watching the late August wind push waves across the tallgrass prairie, and thought, not for the first time, that this landscape could drive a person mad. The big blue stem stood over 6 feet tall this time of year, a golden green ocean that stretched to every horizon, broken only by the occasional limestone outcropping or the dark line of trees along a distant creek bed. There was nothing to stop the eye, nothing to anchor the mind. Just grass, sky, and wind, endless and eternal, whispering secrets in a language older than human speech. She had transferred to Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve 3 years ago, drawn by the promise of quiet after a decade working the crowded trails of Great Smoky Mountains. She had wanted solitude, space to breathe, a place where the biggest problems were controlled burns and the occasional lost hiker who wandered off the marked paths. For the most part, the prairie had delivered. The preserve saw modest visitor numbers, nothing like the millions who flooded the famous parks, and the work was peaceful, rhythmic, tied to the seasons and the slow cycles of grassland ecology. But this summer had been different. Samantha finished her coffee and checked her watch. 7:15 a.m. The morning was already warm, the air thick with humidity that promised another brutally hot day. Her uniform clung to her skin despite the early hour. She had paperwork waiting inside, reports on the prairie chicken population, burn schedules for the fall, the usual bureaucratic tedium. But she couldn't make herself go in. Not yet. Not with Kyle Mercer's truck still sitting in the parking lot at the trailhead, exactly where it had been for the past 36 hours. Kyle Mercer, the third man to go missing this summer. The first had been in June. A tourist from Oklahoma City named Bradley Simmons, 42 years old, divorced, traveling alone. He had checked in at the visitor center, asked about the Southwind Nature Trail, and walked into the grass. His rental car sat in the lot for 3 days before anyone thought to report him missing. Search teams found nothing. No body, no belongings, no sign of where he had gone or what had happened. The official report listed him as a missing person, case ongoing. The second was in July. A local man named Travis Ward, 28, recently separated from his wife. He had told his brother he was going to the preserve to clear his head. His truck was found at the scenic overlook near the bison pasture. Like Bradley Simmons, Travis Ward had simply vanished. The grass had swallowed him whole. Now Kyle Mercer, 35 years old, insurance adjuster from Wichita, driving through on his way to a conference in Kansas City. He had stopped at the preserve on a whim. Samantha had spoken to him herself, had given him a trail map and warned him about the heat. He had smiled and thanked her and walked out the door, and that was the last anyone had seen of him. 3 men, 3 disappearances, no bodies, no evidence, no explanation. Samantha keyed her radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Vance at Spring Hill. Any updates on the Mercer search?" The response came back scratchy but clear. "Negative, Ranger Vance. Search teams are assembling at the trailhead now. Sheriff's Department is sending a K-9 unit. You're cleared to join the search when ready." "Copy that. I'll head over now." She clipped the radio to her belt and stepped off the porch into the morning heat. The grass whispered around her as she walked toward her truck, and Samantha tried very hard not to think about the pattern she had noticed, the pattern no one else seemed to see. All 3 missing men had been alone. All 3 had been going through some kind of personal turmoil, divorce, separation, job stress, and all 3 had been last seen walking toward the same stretch of prairie, the area locals called the Bottomlands, where the grass grew tallest and the creeks ran dry in summer drought. She also tried not to think about what old Amos Whitehorse had told her last week, when she had driven out to his ranch to ask if he had seen anything unusual. Amos was Osage, one of the few remaining families who had lived on this land before it became a preserve. His grandfather had ranched these hills when they were still called the Flint Hills, before the Park Service came, before the tourists, before everything. Samantha had expected him to dismiss her questions, to offer some rational explanation for the disappearances. Instead, he had gone very quiet. "There's a woman," he had said finally, not meeting her eyes. "My grandmother used to tell stories, a woman who walks the prairie at night, beautiful beyond words, calling to men who have lost their way. The dear woman, she called her. She comes when men are weak, when their hearts are troubled. She shows them something. What they want most, or what they fear most, I was never sure. And then she takes them into the grass and they don't come back." Samantha had thanked him politely and left. Folklore, superstition, the kind of story that accumulated around any wild place, especially one as empty and strange as the tallgrass prairie. But driving toward the trailhead now, watching the grass move in waves that looked almost like fingers beckoning, she couldn't shake the feeling that Amos Whitehorse had been trying to warn her about something he knew was real. Kyle Mercer had seen her for the first time near the creek bed. He had been walking for maybe an hour, following the trail map the ranger had given him, trying to clear his head before the conference. The divorce had been finalized 2 weeks ago. 15 years of marriage, gone. His wife, ex-wife, had already moved her new boyfriend into the house that Kyle was still paying the mortgage on. The conference in Kansas City was supposed to be a distraction, a chance to focus on work instead of the slow-motion collapse of everything he had built. But the prairie wasn't distracting him. If anything, it was making everything worse. The emptiness of the landscape mirrored something inside him, some vast hollow space where his life used to be. He walked through the grass and felt himself disappearing, becoming as small and insignificant as the insects that buzzed around his head. That's when he saw her. She was standing near a dry creek bed, maybe 50 yards off the trail, partially hidden by the tall grass. A woman in a white dress, or something white anyway, flowing and loose in the wind. She was facing away from him, her dark hair moving in the breeze, and Kyle's first thought was that she must be lost. No one dressed like that for hiking. No one should be out here alone without water, without proper shoes, without... She turned and looked at him. Kyle stopped breathing. She was beautiful, not pretty, not attractive. Beautiful in a way that bypassed thought entirely, that reached into some deep animal part of his brain and pulled. Her face was perfect, symmetrical, with dark eyes that seemed to hold all the sadness in the world. She smiled at him, and Kyle felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of grief and anger and loneliness that had been tightening for months. "Are you lost?" he heard himself ask. "I was." Her voice was low and musical, carrying easily across the distance between them. "But I think I've found what I was looking for." She began walking toward him, moving through the grass with a fluid grace that seemed almost to float. Kyle knew he should stay on the trail. He knew he should ask her name, find out if she needed help, behave like a rational adult instead of standing frozen like a deer in headlights. But she was so beautiful. And she was looking at him like no one had looked at him in years, like he mattered, like he was worthy of attention, of desire, of love. She reached him and stood close, too close, closer than strangers should stand. He could smell her now, something floral and wild, like prairie flowers after rain, mixed with something else, something muskier, earthier. Her hand touched his arm, and her skin was cool despite the August heat. "Walk with me," she said. "I want to show you something." Kyle walked. The search team found Kyle Mercer's trail map at 10:47 a.m., lying in the grass about a quarter mile from the marked path. Samantha bagged it as evidence, noting the location on her GPS, trying to ignore the chill that ran down her spine despite the 90-degree heat. The map was pristine, no blood, no damage, no sign of struggle. It looked as though Kyle had simply set it down and walked away, abandoning the last connection to the trail that would have led him back to safety. "Got something over here?" One of the sheriff's deputies was waving from a spot near the creek bed maybe 30 yards away. Samantha pushed through the grass, Feeling it close behind her like a curtain, the deputy was pointing at the ground, at a set of footprints pressed into the dry mud of the creek bank. 2 sets, actually. One clearly made by hiking boots, Kyle's size probably, and another set beside them, smaller, lighter, made by bare feet. No, not bare feet. Samantha crouched down, studying the prints. They were the right size for human feet, the right shape. But the impression was wrong. Instead of toes, the front of each print showed 2 distinct points, pressed deep into the mud. Like hooves. Like deer hooves. "The hell kind of tracks are those?" the deputy asked, leaning over her shoulder. "I don't know." Samantha took photos, measured the stride length, noted the direction the tracks were heading. Deeper into the bottomlands, away from any trail, toward the part of the prairie where the grass grew so tall it swallowed everything. Some kind of animal, maybe. Deer prints on top of human prints. But she knew that wasn't right. The hoof prints weren't on top of the human prints. They were beside them, matching them step for step, as if a person and a deer had been walking together. Or as if something that was both had been walking alone. She keyed her radio. "Dispatch, Ranger Vance. We found tracks heading into the bottomlands. 2 sets, 1 human, 1 unidentified, requesting additional search teams for the deep grass area." Static crackled for a long moment. Then, "Copy, Ranger Vance. Be advised, Weather Service is showing high fire danger today. Wind picking up from the south. Exercise extreme caution in the tall grass." Understood. Proceeding with caution. But as she stood and looked out at the sea of grass stretching toward the horizon, Samantha understood that caution might not be enough. Whatever had taken Kyle Mercer, whatever had taken Bradley Simmons and Travis Ward, was out there in the bottomlands, waiting, and it had been waiting for a very long time. Kyle didn't know how long they had been walking. Time had become strange since he met the woman in the white dress. The sun seemed to move in jumps, leaping across the sky in sudden lurches, and the prairie around them kept changing, now open and golden, now dense and green, now shadowed by clouds that appeared from nowhere. He should have been exhausted, dehydrated, desperate to turn back. Instead, he felt light, almost giddy, as if he were walking in a dream. The woman walked beside him, her hand occasionally brushing his, her voice a constant murmur that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She asked him about his life, his marriage, his divorce. She listened with an attention that felt absolute, as if his words were the most important sounds in the world. He told her things he had never told anyone, his fears, his failures, the shameful secret belief that he had deserved to be left, that he wasn't worth loving. She smiled when he said that, a strange smile, sad and hungry at the same time. "All men think that," she said. "All the men who come to me. They think they are worthless, unlovable. They think no one sees them. But you see me." Kyle wasn't sure if it was a statement or a question. "I see you." She stopped walking and turned to face him. They were deep in the grass now, so deep he couldn't see the sky, couldn't see anything but the golden stalks pressing close on all sides and her face. Her impossible face. Her dark eyes that held something ancient and patient. "I see what you are. Do you want to know what that is?" Kyle nodded. He couldn't have spoken if he tried. She leaned close enough to kiss, and whispered in his ear. He looked down. Her feet were wrong. Where bare feet should have been, he saw hooves, delicate, cloven, like a deer's, half hidden in the grass. And suddenly he understood. He understood what Amos Whitehorse's grandmother had known, what the old stories tried to warn about, what happened to men who followed beauty into the tall grass without asking where it led. "What are you?" His voice came out as a whisper. She smiled, showing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. "I am what has always been here," she said. "I am what waits for men who take without asking, who want without deserving. I am the judgment you have been running from your whole life." Kyle tried to run, but the grass had closed around him, pressing tight, holding him in place, and the last thing he saw was her face changing, still beautiful, still terrible, still smiling as the prairie swallowed him whole. Samantha found him 3 hours later. He was sitting in a small clearing deep in the bottomlands, his back against a limestone boulder, his eyes open and staring at nothing. He was alive. She checked for a pulse immediately, called it in on the radio, but he wouldn't respond to his name, wouldn't respond to touch, wouldn't respond to anything. He just sat there, staring, his lips moving in words she couldn't hear. She leaned close, trying to make out what he was saying. "She showed me," Kyle whispered. "She showed me what I am." Kyle, can you hear me? I'm Ranger Vance. You're safe now. Help is coming." His eyes focused on her for the first time, but there was something wrong in them, something broken in a way that couldn't be fixed. "You're a woman," he said. "She doesn't take women. Women are safe from her. But the rest of us..." His voice trailed off into something that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "The rest of us are just waiting our turn." The medevac helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. Kyle Mercer was airlifted to a hospital in Wichita, where he was admitted to the psychiatric ward with what the doctors called acute dissociative disorder of unknown origin. He would spend the next 3 months there, slowly relearning how to speak, how to eat, how to be a person. He never told anyone what he saw in the grass, but sometimes, late at night, the nurses heard him whimpering in his sleep, repeating the same words over and over. "She showed me. She showed me what I am." Samantha drove out to Amos Whitehorse's ranch that evening. The old man was sitting on his porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and red. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He just nodded toward the empty chair beside him and waited. "I found him," Samantha said. "Kyle Mercer. He's alive. But not whole. No, not whole." They sat in silence for a while, watching the grass move in the evening wind. Finally, Samantha asked the question that had been burning in her mind all day. "The dear woman. How do you stop her?" Amos was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been grief. "You don't," he said. "She's not something to be stopped. She's something to be understood. My grandmother said she was old when the grass first grew here, old when the buffalo covered these hills like a brown sea. She's part of the land, part of the balance. The balance? Men who hurt women, men who take without giving, who use without caring. The dear woman finds them. She shows them what they are, the truth they've been hiding from. Some of them survive the seeing. Most don't." He looked at Samantha with eyes that held generations of knowing. The ones who disappear, the ones who don't come back. My grandmother said they become part of the grass. Their bodies feed the roots, and their spirits walk with her. Forever. Samantha thought about Bradley Simmons, divorced, traveling alone. Travis Ward, separated from his wife. Kyle Mercer, fresh from a broken marriage. All of them men at the edge of something, men carrying guilt or anger or shame. All of them drawn to the same stretch of prairie, the same deep grass, the same beautiful woman who waited where the paths ended. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Amos smiled, and there was something almost like warmth in it. "Because you're a woman. She won't hurt you. And because someone needs to know what walks out there, what has always walked out there. Someone needs to remember the old stories." He looked back out at the prairie, at the grass now silver in the fading light. "Go home, Ranger Vance. Do your job. Write your reports. But when the men go missing, and they will go missing, they always do, don't waste time looking for something to punish. The prairie takes care of its own justice." Samantha drove home in the dark, the grass moving on both sides of the road like something watching her pass. She filed her reports. She closed the cases. Missing person, circumstances unknown. It was the only language the Park Service would accept. But sometimes, on nights when the wind blows just right, Samantha drives out to the bottomlands and parks at the edge of the tall grass. She doesn't get out. She just sits there watching, listening to the whispers that might be wind and might be something else. Once she thought she saw a figure moving through the grass in the moonlight, a woman in white, impossibly beautiful, leading someone by the hand toward a darkness that had no end. Samantha didn't follow. She wasn't meant to follow. But she remembers. And when the next man disappears, and there will be a next man, there always is, she will know what happened, even if she can never say it. The deer woman walks the tallgrass prairie, and she is always hungry. Location: Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date: October 27, 2019. The fog came off Kabetogama Lake like something breathing, slow and deliberate, swallowing the shoreline an inch at a time. Garrett Moen stood on the dock behind the Ash River Visitor Center and watched it roll toward him across water so still it looked like hammered pewter. No wind. Not even the faintest ripple disturbed the surface, though the forecast had promised gusts up to 15 miles per hour by mid-morning. The air smelled of cold stone and something else beneath it, that particular mineral scent of deep water, the kind that never fully warms even in August. He had worked Voyageurs for 6 years now, long enough to know its rhythms better than he knew the patterns of his own sleep. Late October meant the park had entered its annual exhale, the summer crowds gone, the houseboats pulled from the water, most of the backcountry campsites closed until spring. Only a skeleton crew remained, himself, 2 maintenance workers finishing winterization on the Kettle Falls structures, and Linda Okonkwo running dispatch from the Rainy Lake Station 40 miles northwest. The silence this time of year wasn't empty. It was patient, the whole landscape holding its breath before the long freeze. Garrett finished his coffee standing there on the dock, watching the fog erase the far shore. The lake was deceptive in its stillness. Kabetogama alone covered over 25,000 acres, and it was only one of 4 major lakes within the park's boundaries. Interconnected waterways, bays, islands, peninsulas that looked like islands and islands that looked like peninsulas. The geography shifted depending on water levels, on light, on how well you thought you knew it. Garrett had pulled enough disoriented kayakers out of wrong channels to respect the maze. He'd also recovered 3 bodies in his time here, all drownings, all people who had underestimated how quickly cold water could kill. Back inside the visitor center, he logged his morning check-in with Linda. The radio crackled with the particular static that meant atmospheric interference, the approaching cold front already making itself felt in the electronics. Ash River, this is Rainy Lake. Good copy on your check-in. Weather Service bumped up that front, expecting first snow accumulation by 2200. You still showing that solo kayaker registered for Lost Bay? Garrett checked the permit log. Zoe Hartwell, 26, from Duluth. She'd registered the previous afternoon for a day paddle to Lost Bay and back, listed her expected return time as 1600 hours. Affirmative. She checked out one of the wrecked kayaks yesterday around 0800. Should have been back before dark. A pause. And she didn't return? Her car's still in the lot. Haven't seen her. Copy that. Keep me posted. Probably just decided to camp instead of paddle back in the dark. Weather was clear enough last night. Roger. Ash River out. Garrett set down the radio and looked at the clock on the wall. Just after 7:30, Zoe Hartwell had, according to her permit, 14 hours of experience in recreational kayaking. She'd checked yes on the form, asking if she'd paddled Voyageurs before. She'd declined the satellite beacon rental, noting in the comments that she wanted a real solo experience, no electronics except my camera. Garrett hadn't been on duty when she departed, but Kyle from maintenance had given her the standard briefing. Stay in marked channels, watch for submerged rocks, be off the water before dark. Temperature drops fast this time of year. All routine, all by the book. And yet Garrett couldn't shake the feeling that had started the moment he'd seen her car still sitting in the lot at sunrise. That particular weight in his chest that usually meant something had gone wrong, in a way that wasn't going to have a good ending. He spent the next hour performing the tasks that filled most of his late-season days. Checked the water temperature at the dock thermometer, 41 degrees. cold enough to incapacitate a swimmer in under 15 minutes, kill in under 45. Inspected the kayak rack. One missing, the red 12-footer Zoe had taken. Walked the parking lot, looked through the window of her silver Honda CR-V, saw nothing unusual. A reusable water bottle in the cup holder, a paperback novel on the passenger seat, a University of Minnesota sweatshirt folded on the back seat. The ordinary artifacts of someone who expected to come back. The fog had thickened while he worked, reducing visibility to perhaps 100 yards. The lake had vanished entirely. Garrett could hear it, the soft lap of water against the dock pilings, but he couldn't see it. This wasn't unusual for late October. Fog formed when warm lake water met cold air, and the temperature differential this week had been significant. Nothing to worry about. Nothing that couldn't be explained. Still, he found himself standing at the water's edge again, listening. The silence was wrong. He couldn't identify why at first, and then it clicked. No birds. Not a single goose honking. No ravens calling from the pines. No woodpecker drumming in the distance. Just the water, lapping with a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, and the fog breathing around him. Probably the pressure change from the front, he told himself. Animals sensed weather shifts before humans did. The birds had gone to shelter. He went back inside and radioed Linda. "Rainy Lake, this is Ash River. I'm going to take the patrol boat out to Lost Bay, check on our missing kayaker. Visibility's low but manageable." "Copy, Ash River. Check in every 30. Be careful out there. That fog's not supposed to lift until the front passes." Zoe had known she was making a mistake the moment the fog rolled in, but by then it was too late to do anything about it. She'd woken that morning in her tent on the small island she'd found. Not a designated campsite, but a flat patch of rock and pine that seemed safe enough for one night. The plan had been simple: break camp at first light, paddle the 4 miles back to Ash River, be in her car by noon. Easy. She'd done similar trips a dozen times on Lake Superior, and Kabetogama was gentler, more sheltered. No reason to worry. But the fog had come in while she'd slept, and when she unzipped her tent at 6 a.m., the world had been erased. White in every direction. She couldn't see the water 15 feet below her campsite. She couldn't see the trees she knew stood just behind her tent. For a long moment, she had the disorienting sensation that her little island was floating, untethered, drifting through an endless pale void. She checked her phone. No signal, as expected. She'd known there wouldn't be coverage out here. That was part of the appeal. A day away from the constant noise, the notifications, the demands. Just her and the water and the silence. The silence, though. It pressed against her ears like something physical. No wind, no birds. No sound at all except her own breathing and, somewhere below the fog, the faint slap of water against stone. She'd camped alone before and never minded the quiet. This was different. This quiet had weight. She ate a granola bar and waited. Fog burned off. Everyone knew that. The sun would rise, the air would warm, visibility would improve. She just had to be patient. By 8 o'clock, the fog had thickened. By 9, she couldn't see her own kayak pulled up on the rocks 20 feet away. By 10, she heard the splashing. It came from the water below, rhythmic, steady, like someone swimming. Zoe stood at the edge of her little rock shelf, peering down into the white nothing, and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The splashing stopped. Silence, thick and absolute, that terrible pressing silence that seemed to swallow her voice before it could travel more than a few feet. Then from somewhere out in the fog, a woman's voice. "Help me!" Zoe's heart lurched. "Hello? Where are you? Are you hurt? Please." The voice was strange. Not quite right in its cadence, the syllables spaced too evenly. "Please help me. I'm in the water." "Okay, hold on. I'm coming. Keep talking so I can find you." She scrambled down the rocks toward her kayak, her foot slipping once on moss she couldn't see. The fog was so thick now that she navigated by touch, hands finding the cold plastic of the hull, dragging it toward the water's edge. "Hello?" she called again. "Keep talking." Nothing. The voice had stopped. Zoe stood there, knee-deep in water so cold it burned, holding the kayak's bowline, straining to hear. The lake was absolutely still. No ripples, no movement. If someone had been swimming out there, there would be ripples. She waited a full minute. 2. The cold crept up her legs, numbing her calves, her knees. She should get out of the water. She should go back to her tent and wait for the fog to clear. "Help me." The voice again, but now it came from a different direction. Behind her toward the interior of the island, where there was no water at all. Zoe froze. The fog swirled around her like something alive. "Please," said the voice from the trees. "I'm so cold." Garrett piloted the patrol boat at dead slow, the fog pressing against the windshield like wet cotton. His GPS showed him 300 yards from the entrance to Lost Bay, but he could see nothing except gray-white murk and the occasional dark shape of a rock outcropping sliding past. He'd made this trip hundreds of times. He could navigate these channels in his sleep. But the fog had a way of making familiar water feel alien, and he found himself checking the depth finder more often than necessary, watching for the submerged boulders that lurked in the shallows. The radio crackled. "Ash River, this is Rainy Lake. Status check." "Rainy Lake, I'm approaching Lost Bay now. Visibility approximately 50 feet, holding steady. No sign of the kayaker yet." "Copy. Weather service now showing the front accelerating. Snow expected by 1800 instead of 2200. Recommend you conclude your search by 1600. "Understood. Ash River out." He entered Lost Bay and cut the engine, letting the boat drift while he listened. Lost Bay was a misnomer. It wasn't lost at all, just remote, accessible only through a narrow channel that most casual paddlers missed. The Ojibwe had called it something else, a name Garrett had heard once from an elder at a cultural center presentation and couldn't quite remember now. Something that translated roughly to the water that watches. The silence here was absolute. No engine noise, no birds, no wind. Just the soft slap of water against the hull and somewhere in the fog, the drip of condensation falling from pine branches. "Hello?" Garrett called out. "Zoe Hartwell? Park Service, can you hear me?" His voice disappeared into the fog. No echo, no response, just that thick, waiting silence. He restarted the engine and continued deeper into the bay, scanning the shoreline, what little of it he could see, for any sign of a red kayak, a tent, a person. The fog played tricks on his eyes, shapes forming and dissolving at the edge of visibility. Twice he was certain he saw someone standing on the rocks, and twice the shape resolved into a dead tree or a boulder as he drew closer. The water beneath the boat was dark. The depth finder showed 40 feet, then 60, then, for one strange moment, nothing at all, as if the lake floor had simply ceased to exist. Then the reading snapped back, 72 feet. Kabatagama didn't go that deep. He checked the equipment, found nothing wrong, and decided the fog was interfering with the sonar. That was when he heard the voice. "Garrett." He spun toward the sound, heart hammering. It had come from the port side, out in the fog, close. A woman's voice, but not Zoe Hartwell. He'd never met her, wouldn't know her voice. This voice he knew. "Garrett, I found her." It was Linda Okonkwo, who was 40 miles away at the Rainy Lake station. Linda's voice, unmistakably, coming from somewhere out there in the water. He grabbed the radio. "Rainy Lake, this is Ash River. Linda, did you copy that?" Static. Then Linda's voice from the radio. "Ash River, say again? You're breaking up." "I thought I heard..." He stopped. The voice had come from outside the boat, not from the radio. But that was impossible. Linda was 40 miles away. "Never mind, Rainy Lake. Do you have any other vessels in the Lost Bay area?" "Negative, Ash River. You're the only one out there. Is everything okay?" "Yeah," he said. But his eyes were scanning the fog, searching for the source of that voice. "Yeah, everything's fine. Continuing search. Ash River out." He set down the radio. The fog swirled. The water lay flat and still, impossibly still like a sheet of black glass. Garrett. The voice again, closer now, intimate, as if the speaker were standing right beside him. She's right here. Come see. It was Linda's voice. Exactly Linda's voice. The slight Minnesotan accent, the way she emphasized certain syllables. But Linda never called him by his first name. Over the radio, in all their communications, she called him Ash River or Moen. Never Garrett. He thought suddenly of the stories the Ojibwe elder had told at that presentation years ago. Stories about the spirits that lived in these waters. Ancient things, older than the pines, older than the bedrock. Things that knew the lakes intimately, every depth and current and hidden channel. Things that could call to you in the voices of people you trusted. Things that pulled you under and never let you surface. The elder had shown slides of the pictographs, red ochre paintings on cliff faces throughout the region, some over 1,000 years old. Serpentine shapes with horned heads and spiked tails. The underwater panther, Mishipeshu. The Ojibwe had paddled these waters for generations, and they had rules. Never boat alone. Never answer a voice from the lake at night. Never look too long at still water. Garrett had smiled politely at those stories. He was a park ranger, a professional. He dealt in GPS coordinates and water temperature readings and practical search protocols. He didn't believe in spirits, but here, now, in the fog, with something calling his name in Linda's voice. She's drowning, Garrett. The voice came from the water itself now, from directly below the boat. She's so cold, you have to help her. He looked down. The water was black and still and absolutely flat, and something was looking back at him. Not a face. Not exactly. Just an awareness, a presence, a vast cold intelligence regarding him from the depths, with patient, ancient interest. The water hadn't rippled once. Garrett's hands were shaking as he restarted the engine. Zoe ran. She didn't know what she was running from exactly. The voice had gone silent, the fog showed her nothing, but something deep in her hindbrain, some ancient instinct from before humans had words, screamed at her to move. She crashed through underbrush she couldn't see, branches scraping her face and arms, her foot catching on a root and sending her sprawling. The fog pressed down on her like a physical weight. She scrambled to her feet and kept moving, no direction in mind, just away. Away from the water, away from the voice that had known her name, even though she hadn't told anyone her name out here. Not out loud, not once. Zoe. She stopped. The voice came from directly in front of her. Zoe, it's okay. I'm here to help. A shape in the fog. A figure standing perhaps 10 feet away, features obscured by the white murk. Tall, still, waiting. Who are you? Her voice came out as a whisper. I'm a ranger, the figure said. I've been looking for you. You're lost. I can help you get back. Relief flooded through her. Warm, overwhelming, nearly buckling her knees. A ranger. Of course, they would have noticed she hadn't returned. They would have sent someone. She took a step toward the figure. That's right, the voice said. Come here. Come closer. Another step. The fog shifted, and for just a moment she caught a clearer glimpse of the shape. The proportions were wrong, the limbs too long. The head tilted at an angle no human neck could achieve. Come closer, Zoe. I'm here to help. She ran, back toward the water, because there was nowhere else to go, because the kayak was her only chance. The fog swallowed her, released her, swallowed her again. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe, her lungs burning and her heart slamming against her ribs. The ground sloped downward. She was getting close to the shore. She burst out of the trees and saw her kayak, still there, still waiting at the water's edge. The fog over the lake had thinned slightly. She could see perhaps 30 feet of flat black water before the white curtain closed again. She grabbed the bowline, dragged the kayak into the shallows, climbed in, grabbed the paddle, and stopped. There was something in the water. Just at the edge of visibility, a shape moved beneath the surface. Large, sinuous, circling her with slow, deliberate patience. Zoe sat frozen, paddle raised, unable to move. The shape completed one circuit, then another. She could see it more clearly now as it rose toward the surface. Not a fish, not a wave, but something with mass and intention and terrifying grace. It surfaced. Not a face. Not exactly. But eyes, certainly. Eyes that held intelligence older than the lake, older than the bedrock, older than the glaciers that had carved these waters. Eyes that looked at her and knew her completely, knew every fear she'd ever had and found them uninteresting. The water hadn't rippled once. "We've been waiting for you," the lake said, in her mother's voice. "We've been waiting so long," Zoe screamed. Garrett found the kayak at 14:23 hours drifting empty in the center of Lost Bay. The paddle floated nearby. Zoe Hartwell's life jacket was still clipped inside the cockpit, unused. He searched until the snow started falling. He searched until Linda ordered him back, her voice tight with worry over the radio. He searched until the cold made his hands stop working and the visibility dropped to zero, and the lake lay around him, flat and black and utterly silent, like something waiting. They never found Zoe Hartwell's body. The official report listed presumed drowned, circumstances undetermined. The water temperature, Garrett wrote, would have caused incapacitation within 15 minutes and death within 45. She had not been wearing her life jacket. She had likely fallen from the kayak during the fog event and been unable to climb back in. He didn't write about the voice he'd heard, calling his name in the fog. He didn't write about the shape he'd seen beneath the boat, that vast, patient intelligence regarding him from the depths. He didn't write about how, just before he'd fled Lost Bay, he had looked back and seen the water move. Not rippling, not waving, just shifting, rearranging itself, as if something enormous had rolled over in its sleep, deep below the surface and settled back into stillness. Garrett requested a transfer 2 weeks later. Arizona, Nevada, Utah, anywhere without lakes, anywhere the water didn't watch. His request was denied. Budget cuts. He returned to Voyageurs the following spring, when the ice melted and the water opened up again, black and still and waiting. Some nights when the fog rolled in, he heard voices calling from the lake. Voices he recognized, voices he trusted. He never answered. But sometimes, standing on the dock in the early morning, he looked out at the flat water and saw something looking back. Something that remembered him. Something that was patient. Something that knew, eventually, everyone came to the water. And the water was deep. And the water was cold. And the water never forgot. Location: Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date: November 22nd, 2017. And the coffee had gone cold in Garrett's thermos by the time he noticed. He'd been standing at the edge of the Kabetogama Lake overlook for nearly 20 minutes, watching the way the morning light caught the thin skin of ice forming along the shoreline. It wasn't solid yet, wouldn't be for another few weeks if the temperatures held. But the water had taken on that particular stillness that preceded the deep freeze, as if the lake itself were holding its breath. Voyageurs in late November existed in a state of suspension. The summer crowds had vanished months ago. The ice fishermen and snowmobilers wouldn't arrive until late December at the earliest. For now, the park belonged to the skeleton crew that maintained it. 3 rangers covering over 200,000 acres of interconnected waterways, boreal forest, and rocky islands that most Americans would never see. Garrett Vance had worked these woods for 7 years, long enough to know the rhythm of each season's transition. He knew the way sound changed when the freeze began, how voices carried farther across the hardening water, how the forest dampened to a hush as animals settled into their winter patterns. He knew which bays froze first and which stayed treacherous well into January, where the currents ran warm beneath deceptively solid-looking ice. The Ojibwe who had lived here for generations before the park's establishment had names for these places, warnings passed down through centuries. Garrett had learned some of them from Bill Makwa, the tribal liaison who visited each spring to coordinate fishing rights. The old man had a way of telling stories that made them feel less like legends and more like weather reports, matter-of-fact descriptions of things that simply were. He took a sip of the cold coffee and grimaced. The morning routine had been unremarkable. Equipment check at the Ash River Station, radio test with dispatch in International Falls, review of the week's backcountry permits. Only one name on the list for the holiday week. A solo hiker named Abigail Thornton, 28, registered for a 3-day trip to the Cruiser Lake Trail System. Her permit application noted previous backcountry experience in the Boundary Waters and Isle Royale. She'd listed her emergency contact as a sister in Duluth. Under trip purpose, she had written simply, "I need to be somewhere quiet for a while." Garrett understood that impulse. People came to Voyageurs for many reasons, but solitude was the most common. The park offered a particular kind of emptiness that was hard to find elsewhere. Not the dramatic emptiness of desert or mountain, but something older and more patient. The boreal forest didn't demand attention. It simply existed, vast and indifferent, swallowing human presence like water absorbing a single drop of ink. He keyed his radio as he walked back toward the truck. Dispatch Unit 12, completing morning patrol of Kabetogama Overlook, heading to Ash River for vehicle maintenance, over. The response came clear despite the distance. Copy that, Unit 12. Be advised, we've got a weather system moving in from the northwest. Temperatures dropping to single digits tonight. Possible snow after midnight. Over. Understood, dispatch. I'll make sure the backup generator's fueled. Unit 12 out. The drive back to the station took him along the edge of the lake, through corridors of black spruce and paper birch that had already shed their leaves. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of overcast that felt like a ceiling pressing down on the world. Garrett found himself glancing at the water more often than usual, though he couldn't have said why. The lake looked the same as it always did this time of year, dark, still, patient. But there was something in the quality of the silence that morning that made him check his mirrors, made him slow the truck at curves to listen before accelerating again. At the Ash River Station, he spent an hour on routine maintenance, checking fluid levels in the patrol boat that wouldn't be needed again until spring, inventorying the emergency supplies in the backcountry cache, testing the satellite phone that served as their backup when radio signals failed. The work was meditative, familiar. He'd done these same tasks hundreds of times. His hands knew the motions without conscious thought, leaving his mind free to wander through the day's small concerns. The permit holder, Abigail Thornton, should be finishing her second day on the trail by now. She'd planned to camp at Cruiser Lake tonight, then loop back to the trailhead by tomorrow afternoon. Standard route, well marked, nothing that should cause problems for an experienced hiker. And yet, Garrett paused with his hand on the satellite phone, frowning at nothing in particular. There was a feeling he'd learned to trust over his years in the wilderness, a low hum of unease that preceded storms, predator activity, the kinds of situations that went wrong in ways no checklist could predict. He felt it now, faint but persistent, like a radio frequency just below the threshold of hearing. He shook his head and finished the inventory. Probably just the weather change. Barometric pressure drops did strange things to the nervous system. By early afternoon, the temperature had fallen 12 degrees and the sky had darkened to the color of old bruises. Garrett was reviewing trail conditions in the station office when the radio crackled to life. Unit 12, this is dispatch. We've received a satellite ping from the Cruiser Lake area. Looks like someone activated a spot beacon. Can you respond? Over. Garrett felt his stomach tighten. Spot beacons were personal locator devices. Hikers carried them for emergencies when they were beyond cell range. An activation could mean anything from a twisted ankle to something far worse. Dispatch Unit 12, I copy. Do we have identification on the beacon? Over. Affirmative. Registration shows Abigail Thornton, permit holder for the Cruiser Lake Loop. Beacon activated at 1347. No message attached, just the distress signal. Over. Copy that, dispatch. I'm gearing up now. ETA to the trailhead is approximately 45 minutes. I'll report when I'm on foot. Over. Be advised, Unit 12, backup from the Rainy Lake Station is at least 3 hours out due to a boat issue. You may be solo on this one until we can coordinate. Over. Understood. Unit 12 out. Garrett moved through the station with practiced efficiency, pulling his pack from the ready rack, checking his first aid kit, his emergency blanket, his headlamp with fresh batteries. The Cruiser Lake Trail was a 6-mile round trip from the nearest road access, manageable in good weather, but the failing light and dropping temperatures compressed his window. If Abigail was injured, he'd need to reach her before dark. If she was something worse than injured, the timeline became even more critical. He tried not to think about what something worse might mean. Abigail had known something was wrong since yesterday afternoon. Though she couldn't have explained exactly what, the trail had been clear, her navigation precise, her body strong from months of training for exactly this kind of solo trip. She'd needed this. Needed the silence, the solitude, the chance to exist for a few days without the weight of other people's expectations pressing against her skull. The divorce had been finalized in September. The house had sold in October. By November, she'd realized that what she was feeling wasn't grief exactly, but something closer to disorientation, as if she'd been living someone else's life for years and had only just noticed. The forest was supposed to help. It always had before. But yesterday, somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd mile marker, she'd started to feel watched. Not the ordinary awareness of sharing space with wildlife. She'd grown up in northern Minnesota, knew the difference between a deer's cautious attention and a bear's territorial interest. This was something else. A pressure at the edge of her perception, like someone standing just outside her field of vision, matching her pace step for step. She'd stopped twice to scan the trees, to listen for movement in the underbrush. Nothing. Just the wind stirring the spruce boughs, the distant call of a raven, the crunch of her own boots on the frozen ground. She'd made camp at Cruiser Lake as planned, pitched her tent on the designated platform, cooked her dinner over a small propane stove. The routine was comforting in its familiarity. She'd done this dozens of times. There was nothing to fear from a forest, she understood. But that night, she'd dreamed of hunger. Not her own hunger, something else's. A vast, aching emptiness that had no bottom, that consumed and was never filled. She'd woken at 3 a.m. with her heart pounding, certain she'd heard someone calling her name from across the frozen lake. The voice had sounded like her mother, who had been dead for 6 years. She'd lain awake until dawn, telling herself it was just the wind, just the strange acoustics of the water, just the isolation playing tricks on an exhausted mind. By morning, she'd almost convinced herself, but then she'd found the footprints. They circled her tent in a perfect ring, pressed deep into the frost-hardened ground. Human footprints, barefoot, each one longer and narrower than any foot should be. They started nowhere and ended nowhere. Just the circle, complete and precise, as if someone had walked around her shelter all night without ever arriving or departing. Abigail had stared at them for a long time, her breath clouding in the frozen air, her rational mind struggling to construct an explanation that made sense. A prank from another hiker. An animal track she was misreading. A pattern in the frost that only looked like footprints from certain angles. None of these explanations felt true. She'd packed up her camp with shaking hands, abandoning her plan to spend another night on the trail. The trailhead was 6 miles back. She could make it in 3 hours if she pushed, be in her car by early afternoon, drive to Duluth and her sister's apartment in central heating and walls that locked. She'd activated her spot beacon as a precaution, not a full emergency, just a check-in, a breadcrumb trail in case something went wrong. Something was going to go wrong. She knew it now with a certainty that bypassed rational thought entirely. The forest felt different today. The spaces between the trees seemed deeper, darker, as if the shadows were pooling into something solid. The silence had a texture to it, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something listening. Abigail walked faster, her boots finding the trail by memory as her eyes scanned the tree line, the frozen lake shore, the dense stands of spruce that blocked the weak November light. She was 2 miles from the trailhead when she heard the voice. Abigail. It came from her left, from somewhere out on the lake. The ice wasn't safe yet. Everyone knew that. Every sign at every access point warned against it. But the voice came from the ice anyway. It sounded like her mother, It sounded exactly like her mother, the particular way she'd always said Abigail's name with a slight emphasis on the second syllable, a rhythm that no one else had ever quite replicated. "Abigail, sweetheart, I'm out here. I need help." She stopped walking. Her hands were trembling, and it wasn't from the cold. The voice was impossible. Her mother was dead, had been dead for 6 years, had died in a hospital in Minneapolis with Abigail holding her hand. This was not her mother. This could not be her mother. "Please," the voice called. It was closer now, though she hadn't seen anything move across the ice. "I'm so cold. I've been waiting for you. Please come help me." Abigail's feet took a step toward the lake before her mind caught up and screamed at her to stop. The ice. The ice wasn't safe. Even if there was someone out there, which there wasn't, there couldn't be, she couldn't reach them. She would fall through. She would drown in water so cold it would stop her heart in minutes. "Mom?" The word escaped before she could stop it, a small and broken sound that the forest swallowed without echo. Silence. The voice had stopped. The pressure of being watched intensified, became almost physical, a weight against her chest that made it hard to breathe. Abigail turned back to the trail, and the trail wasn't there. Where the path had been, clear and well marked just moments ago, there was only forest. Dense, identical spruce in every direction, their dark boughs interlocking like fingers. She spun, orienting herself by the lake. The lake was still there. She could see the gray expanse of it through the trees, but the trail had vanished as if it had never existed, as if the forest had simply closed behind her like a door. Her spot beacon. She grabbed for it, pressed the emergency button with fingers gone clumsy from cold and fear. The device beeped, confirming transmission. Help would come. She just had to stay calm. Stay where she was. Wait for rescue. Abigail. The voice was behind her now. Not from the lake, from the forest. From everywhere at once, the words stretching and distorting until it barely sounded like language anymore. She ran. Garrett reached the trailhead as the first snowflakes began to fall. The sky had darkened prematurely, clouds pressing down like a lid being closed on a box. He shouldered his pack and moved onto the trail at a pace just short of jogging, his flashlight cutting a narrow tunnel through the gathering dusk. The beacon coordinates placed Abigail's distress signal about 2 miles in, near where the trail skirted the eastern shore of Cruiser Lake. If she was mobile, she might be heading toward him. If she was injured, he'd find her along the route. The forest felt wrong. Garrett had walked this trail perhaps 100 times over the years, knew every bend and landmark, every overlook and stream crossing. But tonight the familiar geography seemed subtly altered, as if the trees had shifted position when he wasn't looking. The silence was absolute. No wind, no animal sounds, not even the creak of branches under the weight of new snow. Just his own footsteps, his own breathing, the rustle of his jacket with each stride. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch Unit 12. I'm on the Cruiser Lake Trail, approximately 1 mile from the beacon coordinates. No visual on the permit holder yet. Trail conditions are deteriorating with snowfall. Over." Static answered him. Not the clean static of distance or interference. Something else. Something that rose and fell in patterns that almost sounded like breathing. "Dispatch, do you copy? Over." The static shifted. Through it, very faintly, he heard what sounded like a woman's voice saying his name. But the voice didn't come from the radio. It came from somewhere ahead on the trail, muffled by distance and snowfall. "Abigail?" he called. "Abigail Thornton? This is Park Ranger Vance. Can you hear me?" "Garrett." The voice was clearer now. It sounded familiar, though he couldn't place it. "Garrett, I'm hurt. Please help me." He moved toward the sound, his flashlight beam sweeping the trail ahead. The snow was falling harder now, big wet flakes that clung to his jacket and melted against his face. Visibility was dropping fast. He should be able to see the lake by now. The trail ran within 50 feet of the shore at this point. But there was only forest, black spruce pressing close on both sides like walls of a narrowing corridor. "Keep talking," he called. "I'm coming to you. Where are you hurt? I'm so hungry. The voice had changed. It was still familiar, still almost recognizable, but there was something wrong with it now. A hollowness, an echo that didn't match the dense forest acoustics. I've been waiting so long. I'm so hungry and so cold. Garrett stopped walking. His hand moved to the bear spray on his belt, though he knew even as he reached for it that bear spray wouldn't help with what was happening. He thought of Bill Makwa's stories, told in that matter-of-fact tone over cups of black coffee in the Ash River station. The old man had talked about things that lived in these woods before the Europeans came, before the Ojibwe came, before anyone came. Things that were part of the land itself, patient and ancient and terrible. Things that wore hunger like a skin. You're not Abigail, Garrett said. His voice was steady, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. What happened to her? Laughter answered him, not from one direction but from all directions at once, a sound like ice cracking under pressure. The trees around him seemed to lean inward, their boughs heavy with more than snow. The temperature had plummeted. His breath came in thick white clouds that hung motionless in the dead air. She was hungry too. The voice was everywhere now, sourceless and vast. They all are at the end. When the emptiness grows large enough, they finally understand. They finally see what I see. A world made of mouths, all of them starving, all of them reaching for something that will never fill them. Garrett's flashlight flickered. In the strobe of failing light, he saw something standing at the edge of the beam. Tall, too tall. Its proportions wrong in ways his mind refused to process. For a single frozen moment, he met its eyes and felt the hunger inside them, an absence so profound it threatened to pull him in like a current. Then the light steadied and it was gone. Abigail. He was running now, following the trail by instinct and desperation, crashing through underbrush that tore at his jacket and pants. Abigail, where are you? He found her in a clearing that shouldn't have existed. She was sitting with her back against a boulder, her knees drawn up to her chest, her eyes wide and unblinking. Frost covered her exposed skin, glittered in her hair, but she was alive. He could see her breath, shallow and rapid, clouding in the frozen air. She didn't react when he approached, didn't seem to see him at all. Abigail, I'm Ranger Vance. I'm here to help you. He knelt beside her, checking her pulse, thready but present, her pupils, responsive but unfocused. Hypothermia maybe. Shock, definitely, but something else too. Something in the way she stared past him at the trees, her lips moving soundlessly. It's still here, she whispered. Her voice was raw, as if she'd been screaming for hours. It showed me what it sees. All the hunger. All the empty places where people used to be. It doesn't want to kill us, that's not enough. It wants us to understand first. To feel what it feels forever. We're leaving, Garrett said. Can you walk? I need you to try to walk. She looked at him then, finally focused on his face. Her expression held something beyond fear, a terrible comprehension, as if she'd glimpsed a truth too large for human minds to contain. It let you find me, she said. It wants you to take me back, to bring the hunger with us. Garrett pulled her to her feet. She was ice cold, her movements stiff and uncoordinated, but she could walk. That was enough. It had to be enough. He wrapped his emergency blanket around her shoulders and oriented himself by his compass. The trail was gone, the familiar landmarks erased, but north was still north. The trailhead was northeast. They would walk northeast until they found the road. Behind them, in the darkness between the trees, something followed. He could feel its attention like a hand pressed between his shoulder blades, patient and amused. It didn't need to catch them. It had all the time in the world. It had already planted something in Abigail's mind, something in his own mind, a seed of emptiness that would grow in the quiet hours, in the spaces between sleep and waking, until the hunger felt like their own. They walked for what felt like hours. The snow stopped, then started again. Garrett's radio remained dead. His flashlight held, barely, its beam growing weaker as the batteries drained. And then, finally, impossibly, He saw the trailhead parking lot through the trees. His truck was where he'd left it. Abigail's rental car sat beside it, already buried under 2 inches of snow. Garrett helped her into the passenger seat of his truck, started the engine, cranked the heat to maximum. She was shivering violently now, a good sign, he told himself. Shivering meant her body was still fighting. What was it? He asked, though part of him didn't want to know. What did you see out there? Abigail stared through the windshield at the dark wall of forest behind the parking lot. The trees stood motionless, unbothered by the wind that had begun to pick up. Between 2 massive spruces, just at the edge of the headlight beams, he thought he saw a shape, tall, patient, watching them drive away. It used to be a person, she said softly. A long time ago. It was so hungry it ate itself, and then it ate everything else, and it's still hungry. It's always going to be hungry. She turned to face him, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. A depth, a darkness, a hollow space where something essential had been removed. And now I am too. The official report listed the incident as hiker disorientation due to weather conditions, no injuries, no further action required. Abigail Thornton was treated for mild hypothermia at the Rainy Lake Medical Center and released the following morning. She drove back to Duluth and never returned to Voyageurs. Garrett finished the season and requested a transfer in December. He cited family reasons. The request was approved. But before he left, he returned to the Cruiser Lake Trail one final time. He walked the entire loop in full daylight on a clear day with temperatures well above freezing. The trail was exactly where it should be. The landmarks were familiar. The forest sounded normal. Birds, wind, the distant cry of a loon on the water. At the clearing where he'd found Abigail, he stopped. The boulder was there, real and solid and ordinary. No footprints in the soil. No sign that anything unusual had ever occurred. But as he turned to leave, he heard it, faint, distant, from somewhere out on the frozen lake. Garrett. His mother's voice. His mother, who had died when he was 17, who had called him by his full name when she was angry, and by a nickname when she was proud. His mother's voice, impossible and perfect, drifting across the ice. "I've been waiting, sweetheart. I'm so hungry. Please come help me." Garrett walked back to his truck. He didn't run. He didn't look back. He drove south that afternoon and didn't stop until he reached Des Moines, where the trees were smaller and the forest had edges and the winters were gentle enough that nothing ancient ever woke from its long, patient sleep. Some nights, he still dreams of hunger. Not his own. Something else's. Vast and cold and eternal, waiting in the space between the trees where no trail leads and no search party follows. He wakes with his stomach aching, with an emptiness no meal can fill. He tells himself it will fade. He tells himself he left it behind in those northern woods. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, he hears a voice calling his name from very far away. And each time it sounds a little closer. Location: Congaree National Park, South Carolina. Date: November 18, 2011. In the morning, mist clung to the surface of Cedar Creek like something alive, curling between the knees of bald cypress trees that rose from the black water in silent congregation. Derek Rawlings stood on the elevated boardwalk near the Harry Hampton Visitor Center, coffee thermos warming his palms, and watched the swamp wake up. November had been strange this year, warm and wet, the air thick with humidity that belonged to August rather than the edge of winter. The forecast called for storms by evening, a system pushing up from the Gulf that would drop several inches of rain on ground already saturated from weeks of flooding. The water table sat high, transforming the forest floor into a mirror that reflected the massive loblolly pines and ancient hardwoods in perfect, unsettling symmetry. He had worked Congaree for 7 years now, long enough to know its moods and rhythms, the way the light changed through the canopy at different seasons, the particular silence that settled over the bottomland when the barred owls stopped calling. This was the largest intact old-growth bottomland hardwood forest left in the country, over 26,000 acres of primordial swamp that looked much as it had before Europeans ever set foot on this continent. The trees here were champions, State and national record holders, some of them, rising 150 feet or more into a canopy so dense that summer visitors often remarked it felt like twilight even at noon. Derek loved this place in a way he found difficult to articulate, a bone-deep appreciation for its antiquity, its indifference to human concerns, the way it simply continued existing as it had for millennia while the world outside changed beyond recognition. He finished his coffee as the first hints of true daylight began to filter through the mist. The morning routine was second nature now. Check the weather radio, review the overnight logs, verify that the trail condition boards were updated to reflect current water levels. The Weston Lake Loop Trail was closed due to flooding, had been for 2 weeks, but the boardwalk loop and the first mile of the Bluff Trail remained accessible. Derek noted that a single vehicle had been logged in the overnight register, a silver Honda Civic South Carolina plates, registered to one Samantha Marsh of Columbia. She had signed in at 4:47 p.m. the previous day, listing her intended route as the Kingsnake Trail to Wise Lake and back, expected return by dark. She had not signed out. Derek checked the lot. The silver Civic sat alone near the trailhead, windshield pearled with moisture from the night's humidity. He walked a slow circle around the vehicle, noting the details automatically. Doors locked, no signs of disturbance, a reusable water bottle visible in the cup holder, a paperback book splayed open on the passenger seat. On the dashboard, a handwritten note. Sam, meet you at the Kingsnake Junction at 5. If I'm late, start without me. M. The paper was dated yesterday. Derek frowned. The register showed only one name, one vehicle. Whoever M was, they had either never arrived or had come and gone without signing in. He keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 3 at Congaree. I've got a vehicle in the overnight lot, single registrant, intended return by dark yesterday. No sign out. Requesting a welfare check authorization. The response came back clear, the familiar voice of Linda at the district office. Copy that, Unit 3. What's the registrant's intended route? Kingsnake Trail to Wise Lake. Water's high out there, she would have had to wade in places. Understood. You're clear to proceed with the welfare check. Keep us posted. Weather Service is showing that storm system moving faster than expected. You've got maybe 4 hours before it gets ugly out there. Copy, dispatch. Beginning welfare check at 0715. We'll report in hourly. Derek gathered his pack. Water, first aid kit, GPS unit, extra radio batteries, the machete he carried for clearing downed limbs after storms. He paused at the trailhead, studying the soft mud where the boardwalk gave way to natural ground. Footprints, a single set of hiking boots, size 7 or 8, heading northeast toward the Kingsnake Junction. The prints were partially filled with water, edges softened by the night's humidity, but still readable. Samantha Marsh had come this way. The first mile passed without incident. Derek moved at a steady pace, his boots finding the familiar rhythm of the trail, eyes scanning for any sign of the missing hiker. The forest closed around him in layers, the understory of dwarf palmettos and switch cane, the mid-story of red maples and sweet gums, and above it all the towering canopy of loblolly pines and bald cypresses draped in Spanish moss that hung like tattered curtains in the still air. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft squelch of his footsteps and the occasional distant call of a pileated woodpecker. He found the first oddity at the Kingsnake Junction. The trail split here, one branch continuing toward Wise Lake, the other curving south toward the river bluffs. A wooden trail marker stood at the intersection, its carved lettering worn smooth by decades of humidity and floods. Someone had scratched something into the soft wood below the official text, recent by the look of it, the exposed wood still pale against the weathered gray. Derek leaned close. 3 words, gouged deep with what might have been a car key or a pocket knife. Wrong way back. He photographed the vandalism with his phone, frowning. The scratches looked frantic, the letters uneven, as if carved in haste. Below them, barely visible, was a symbol he didn't recognize, a rough circle with a single vertical line through its center, like a stylized eye. The footprints continued toward Wise Lake. Samantha had started to feel uneasy around mile 2. It was nothing she could name, not at first, just a prickling awareness at the back of her neck, the sense that the forest was paying attention to her in a way it hadn't before. She was an experienced hiker, had done this trail twice in previous years, knew its landmarks and its quirks. But the flooding had changed things. Familiar stretches now lay under inches or feet of tea-dark water, forcing her to wade through sections she remembered as dry ground. The water was surprisingly warm, blood temperature, and opaque enough that she couldn't see her feet. Anything could be down there. She tried not to think about cottonmouths. The light was wrong too. It should have been late afternoon gold filtering through the canopy, but instead the forest seemed to exist in a perpetual gray twilight, the sun invisible behind the building clouds. Samantha checked her watch. 5:23 p.m. Marcus should have met her at the junction 20 minutes ago. She had waited, then decided to push on, figuring he must have taken a wrong turn, would catch up eventually. Now, wading through thigh-deep water with the trail markers increasingly difficult to spot, she was beginning to regret that decision. The silence was what finally made her stop. It descended like a held breath. One moment the swamp was alive with the sounds of frogs and insects and distant birdsong. The next there was nothing. Absolute nothing. Samantha stood motionless in the warm water, straining to hear anything at all. Her own breathing seemed obscenely loud. Her heartbeat pulsed in her ears. She became aware, with the particular clarity of sudden fear, that she was utterly alone in 26,000 acres of trackless swamp, standing in water she couldn't see through, in a silence so complete it felt intentional. Something moved at the edge of her vision. She turned, heart lurching, but there was nothing. Only the endless gray columns of cypress trunks, the hanging moss, the dark water reflecting a sky the color of old bruises. She was certain she had seen movement. A shape, low to the water, sliding between the trees, maybe 30 yards to her left. A log, maybe. An alligator. Something with a reasonable explanation. But the silence continued, pressing against her ears like something physical, and Samantha Marsh began to walk faster. Derek reached Wise Lake at 8:47, having waded through 4 stretches of flooded trail, the water reaching his waist in places. The lake itself was barely distinguishable from the surrounding swamp, its borders lost to the high water, the cypress knees jutting from the surface like the fingers of something buried and trying to claw free. He paused on a relatively dry hummock to radio dispatch. "Dispatch Unit 3, I'm at Wise Lake, no sign of the missing hiker yet. Trail conditions are rough, significant flooding throughout. I'm going to continue northwest along the lake shore, see if she tried to loop back via the Oak Ridge connector." Static crackled for a long moment before Linda's voice came through, distant and slightly distorted. "Copy, Unit 3. Be advised. Storm system. Accelerating. Recommend you 30 minutes. Back to trailhead." "Dispatch, you're breaking up. Say again?" But the radio offered only static now, a hissing white noise that seemed to pulse and breathe like something alive. Derek checked the batteries, checked the channel, tried again. Nothing. He was alone. He continued along the lakeshore. The wrongness accumulated gradually, a cypress knee that seemed to have moved between glances. Impossible, of course, but he could have sworn it was 10 feet to his left a moment ago, and now it stood directly in his path. A smell that didn't belong. Flowers, sweet and cloying, like gardenias, though nothing bloomed in the swamp this time of year, and sounds that started filtering back into the silence, but wrong sounds. A barred owl calling in the full light of morning, when they should be sleeping. The splash of something large moving through water, always just out of sight, always stopping the moment he turned to look. Derek found the backpack at 0923. It hung from a low branch over the water, a purple day pack with a water bottle clipped to the side strap. The same water bottle he had seen in the silver Civic. Samantha Marsh's pack. Derek waded to it, pulled it down, checked the contents. Protein bars, a rain jacket, a phone with a dead battery, a wallet containing a driver's license that confirmed the owner's identity. The pack was unzipped, its contents dry, as if it had been placed here carefully rather than dropped or lost, as if someone had hung it up for him to find. A sound behind him, close. Derek spun, hand going to the machete at his belt. Nothing. The swamp stretched away in all directions, identical, endless, gray. But he could feel it now, the attention, the weight of something watching. His grandmother had grown up in these parts, had told him stories when he was young, stories about the things that lived in the low-country swamps, the spirits that walked the lonely places. He had dismissed them as folklore, the superstitions of an older generation. But standing here now alone in the flooded forest with a missing woman's backpack in his hands and something watching from the gray spaces between the trees, he found himself remembering. The Platt-Eye. That's what his grandmother had called them. Spirits that could take any shape. A dog, a cat, a pig, a shadow with no source. They haunted crossroads and swamps, lured travelers from safe paths, led them deeper and deeper until they were lost beyond finding. You could always tell a Platt-Eye, his grandmother had said. No matter what form it took, it always had one eye that glowed. One bright, terrible eye that burned in the darkness like a coal from hell's own fire. "Don't be stupid," Derek muttered to himself. He was a park ranger, a professional. There were rational explanations for everything. The strange sounds, the feeling of being watched, even the misplaced backpack. Samantha Marsh had gotten lost, dropped her pack, wandered off the trail. It happened. People made bad decisions when they were scared. He keyed his radio again. "Dispatch, Unit 3. I found the missing hiker's backpack at Wise Lake. No sign of the hiker herself. Requesting backup for expanded search." The static that answered seemed to shape itself into something almost like words. A voice faint and far away, speaking in a rhythm that wasn't quite language. Derek adjusted the frequency, tried again. This time the voice was clearer. But it wasn't dispatch. It was a woman's voice, thin with fear, repeating the same words over and over. "Wrong way back, wrong way back, wrong way back." Samantha had stopped running. There was no point anymore. She stood in a clearing she didn't remember reaching, surrounded by cypress trees so massive they seemed to hold up the sky. The water here came only to her ankles, but she couldn't remember the last time she had seen anything like solid ground. She had been waiting for what felt like hours, following a path that kept changing, trail markers that appeared where there had been none and vanished when she turned her back. The silence had lifted, replaced by sounds, but the sounds were wrong. Her own voice, calling out from somewhere ahead. Marcus's laugh, distant and echoing, coming from everywhere and nowhere. And underneath it all, the soft splash of something moving through the water, circling, patient, always just out of sight. She had seen it once, an hour ago, or a day ago, or a minute. Time had stopped meaning anything in this gray, eternal twilight. A shape between the trees, low and dark, moving with a liquid grace that no natural animal possessed. A dog, she had thought at first. A big black dog lost in the swamp like her. She had called out to it, desperate for any company, any proof that she wasn't alone. It had turned to look at her. One eye. One single eye, burning with a light that hurt to look at. A phosphorescent glow that left after images swimming in her vision. Not a dog. Not any kind of animal she knew. Something wearing the shape of an animal the way a person might wear a coat. Ill-fitting, wrong. A disguise that didn't quite conceal what moved beneath it. It had smiled at her. Dogs don't smile. But this thing had smiled. And then it had melted back into the shadows between the trees, and Samantha had run. Now she stood in the clearing, exhausted beyond thought, and understood that running had accomplished nothing. The clearing hadn't existed until she stopped. She was certain of that. The swamp had created it for her, or the thing in the swamp had, a little pocket of almost dry ground where she could rest and wait for whatever was going to happen next. "What do you want?" Her voice came out as a croak. "What do you want from me?" The swamp didn't answer, but she felt the attention sharpen, felt the weight of that single burning eye focusing on her from somewhere in the gray, and Samantha Marsh began to cry. Derek found the clearing at 10:34. He didn't remember how he had gotten there. The last clear memory he had was of wading through chest-deep water, following what he thought were fresh footprints in a muddy hummock. Then the mist had thickened, and the trees had closed in. And somehow he was here, standing at the edge of a circular clearing that seemed impossibly dry, impossibly bright, as if a column of sunlight had broken through the permanent overcast to illuminate this one small space. Samantha Marsh stood in the center of the clearing. She was facing away from him, motionless, her hiking clothes soaked and muddy. Derek felt a surge of relief so intense it nearly buckled his knees. "Samantha? Ms. Marsh? I'm Derek Rawlings, park ranger. I'm here to help you." She didn't move, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge his voice at all. He stepped into the clearing. The ground was soft and dry beneath his boots, impossible given the flooding, but he was past questioning impossibilities now. "Ma'am, are you injured? Can you walk?" "She's not here anymore." The voice came from Samantha's mouth, but it wasn't her voice. It was too deep, too resonant, as if multiple voices were speaking in imperfect unison. "She went away. I'm here now." Derek's hand found the machete at his belt. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory. "You can always tell a plaid eye by the eye, the one bright eye." "Turn around," he said. Slowly. The thing that had been Samantha Marsh turned. Her face was wrong. The features smeared, shifted, as if someone had tried to sculpt a human face from memory and gotten the proportions subtly off. Her eyes were closed. But as Derek watched, frozen in place by a terror that bypassed thought entirely, one eye began to open. The light that spilled out was blinding. Derek stumbled backward, throwing his arm across his face, but the light seemed to pass through his flesh, illuminating the bones of his hand, burning itself into his vision. He heard laughter, not from the thing in the clearing, but from everywhere, from the trees and the water and the sky, as if the swamp itself were amused by his terror. When his vision cleared, the clearing was empty. Samantha Marsh was gone. The impossible dry ground had flooded, murky water lapping at his knees. The light was gray again, the sun invisible, and Derek was alone in the swamp with the taste of copper on his tongue, and the afterimage of that single burning eye seared into his retinas. His radio crackled. Unit 3. Do you copy?" Linda's voice, clear for the first time in hours. "Derek, respond please. Storm's hit. We're sending a team to your last known position." "Derek?" He raised the radio with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I lost her. I lost her." "Say again, Unit 3. Did you find the missing hiker?" Derek opened his mouth to respond, to tell them about the clearing, the light, the thing wearing Samantha's face. But what would he say? What words could possibly describe what he had seen? "Negative contact," he heard himself say. "Lost the trail in the flooding, returning to trailhead." He began the long wade back, not looking at the trees, not listening to the sounds that followed him. The soft splashes, the distant laughter, the voice that might have been Samantha's calling his name from somewhere impossibly far away. They found Samantha Marsh's body 3 days later, when the floodwaters finally receded. She was discovered a quarter-mile from the Kingsnake Junction, seated at the base of an ancient cypress with her hands folded neatly in her lap. The official cause of death was exposure complicated by dehydration. She had apparently become disoriented in the flooding, lost the trail, and succumbed to the elements before help could arrive. A tragic accident. The kind of thing that happened in wilderness areas, even to experienced hikers. The coroner's report noted one anomaly. Her eyes were open at the time of death, fixed on something in the middle distance, her expression one of absolute terror. But eyes sometimes opened post-mortem. Expressions meant nothing. These details weren't included in the public findings. Derek Rawlings transferred to Grand Canyon the following spring. He told his supervisors it was for the career opportunity, the chance to work a bigger park, a more prestigious posting. He told himself he was ready for a change, that 7 years in the same place was enough for anyone. He never told anyone about the clearing, or the light, or the thing that had turned to face him wearing a dead woman's shape. But sometimes late at night in his quarters overlooking the canyon's rim, he wakes from dreams of flooded forests and burning eyes. Sometimes he hears his grandmother's voice, telling stories he dismissed as folklore. Sometimes he looks out at the vast darkness of the canyon and sees, or imagines he sees, a single point of light moving among the shadows. Patient, watching, remembering. The Plaid Eye never forgets, his grandmother used to say. Once it sees you, it knows you. And it will wait. Derek doesn't know if that's true. He doesn't know if what he saw in the Congaree swamp was a spirit, a hallucination, or something else entirely. He only knows that some nights, when the wind through the canyon sounds almost like laughter, he checks that his doors are locked. 3 times, always 3 times. And still he lies awake until dawn, watching the darkness, waiting for the eye to open. Location: Mammoth Cave National Park, Kentucky. Date: November 3, 2007. The darkness inside Mammoth Cave was not an absence of light. It was a presence, something thick and patient that pressed against Kevin Marsh's headlamp like a living thing, testing the boundaries of its cage. 20 years he had worked these passages, and he had never grown accustomed to that particular quality of underground blackness, the way it seemed to have weight and texture and intention. He stood at the entrance to the historic section, checking his gear for the 3rd time that morning. Helmet with primary and backup lights, knee pads, elbow pads, the worn leather gloves that had seen him through more rescues than he cared to count. His pack held 200 feet of static rope, a basic med kit, emergency rations, and the handheld radio that connected him to the surface, his lifeline to the world above. The cave's natural entrance yawned before him, exhaling air that held steady at 54 degrees regardless of season, carrying the smell of ancient limestone and something else beneath it, something mineral and old that defied description. 7 more days. That was what Kevin kept telling himself as he performed his morning inspection of the tourist route. 7 days until retirement, until he could hand over his keys and his radio and his intimate knowledge of these passages to someone younger, someone who still found the darkness exciting rather than oppressive. He had put in his 20 years with the National Park Service, the last 15 specifically with Mammoth Cave's Search and Rescue Division. He had pulled 11 people out of restricted areas where they had no business being. He had recovered 4 bodies from places the map said didn't exist. He had earned his rest. The cave system stretched beneath the Kentucky hills like the root structure of some impossible tree. Over 400 miles of surveyed passages, with estimates suggesting twice that remained undiscovered. Tourists saw perhaps 2 miles of it. The safe parts, the lit parts, the sections where the NPS had installed handrails and concrete paths and emergency phones every 100 yards. But Kevin knew the other mammoth, the one that existed beyond the locked gates and warning signs. He knew the crawlways that narrowed to 18 inches. He knew the vertical drops that plunged into darkness so complete, your headlamp beam simply vanished, swallowed before it could find a bottom. He knew the places where the cave breathed, where air currents shifted for no discernible reason, where sounds caved in ways that made distance and direction meaningless. He knew, too, the stories. Every cave system had them, tales passed down from the old-timers, from the saltpeter miners who had worked these passages during the War of 1812, from the tuberculosis patients who had lived and died in the cave's constant climate in the 1840s. Stories about sounds that had no source, about voices calling from passages that led nowhere, about the knocking. Kevin had heard it himself, twice in 20 years. A rhythmic tapping from somewhere deep in the rock, too regular to be natural, too distant to locate. The old Cornish miners who had worked America's caves and mines in the 19th century had a name for the spirits that made such sounds: Tommyknockers. Sometimes helpful, warning of cave-ins and gas pockets. Sometimes not. Sometimes they knocked to lure you deeper, to draw you into passages that collapsed behind you, to guide you toward drops you couldn't see until you were already falling. Kevin didn't believe in Tommyknockers. He was a professional, a man of ropes and carabiners and radio protocols. But he respected the stories because the stories were really about the cave itself, about how it could trick you, disorient you, make you trust sounds that meant nothing and ignore warnings that meant everything. The cave was patient. The cave remembered. And the cave, in its own mineral way, was hungry. His radio crackled. "Kevin, this is Surface. You copy?" He keyed the mic. "Surface, Kevin. Good copy. Starting my inspection of the historic route now. Should be topside by 1100. Copy that. Hey, before you go, we got a call from the ranger station. 2 cavers didn't check in last night. Derek Simmons and Chloe Vance, both experienced, permitted for the Wild Cave Tour extension into Colossal. They were supposed to surface by 2200 yesterday." Kevin felt the familiar cold weight settle into his stomach. How experienced? Combined 15 years between them. Both certified vertical. Both done mammoth before. That made it worse, not better. Novices got stuck in places where you could find them. Experienced cavers got themselves into places that didn't appear on any map. Colossal entrance or main connection? They went in through the main connection at 1400 yesterday. Plan was to explore some side passages off the Richardson route, loop back through Bedquilt, surface through Colossal by 2200. Kevin closed his eyes, visualizing the route. The Richardson passage was surveyed, well documented, but it branched into a maze of smaller tunnels, some mapped, some merely noted as continues on the charts. If they had pushed into one of those unmapped branches, "I'm heading to Richardson," he said. "Send backup, full cave rescue kit." "Copy, backup en route. Kevin, be careful down there." He almost laughed. 7 more days. 14 hours earlier, Derek had been certain they were still on the mapped route. The passage had narrowed gradually, the way passages did in this part of the system. Ceiling dropping from comfortable walking height to a stoop, then to a crawl. Chloe moved ahead of him, her headlamp casting wild shadows across the limestone as she navigated the squeeze. They had done tighter crawls than this. The flattener in Lechugila, the birth canal in Jewel Cave. This was nothing. "Opens up ahead," Chloe called back, her voice flattened and strange in the confined space. Sound behaved differently underground, sometimes carrying impossibly far, sometimes dying within feet. "Looks like a room." Derek followed her through the final constriction and emerged into a space his headlamp couldn't fully illuminate. The ceiling vanished into darkness overhead. The walls curved away on either side, beyond the reach of his light. The floor was covered in breakdown, chunks of limestone that had fallen from above over thousands of years, ranging from fist-sized to car-sized. "This isn't on the map," Chloe said. She had her survey notebook out, comparing the passage they'd come through to the documented route. "We should have hit the frozen Niagara Formation by now. I don't know what this is." Derek swept his light across the room. The darkness swallowed the beam about 40 feet out. "Could be an unmapped extension. We should mark our entry point and head back." "Yeah." Chloe was already tying flagging tape to a rock near the squeeze they'd emerged from. "Yeah, you're right." That was when they heard the knocking. It came from somewhere deeper in the room. A rhythmic tapping, 3 beats, then silence, then 3 beats again. Metal on stone, or stone on stone. The sound of someone working. The sound of someone trying to get attention. "Hello?" Derek called. His voice echoed strangely, returning to him from directions that didn't make sense. "Is someone there?" The knocking stopped. Silence. The profound absolute silence of deep earth, where no wind blew and no insects chirped, and the only sound was your own breathing and heartbeat. Then from the darkness beyond his headlamp's reach, "Help us." Chloe grabbed his arm. "Derek." "Hello? Where are you? Are you hurt?" "Please." The voice was faint, distant, carrying that peculiar underground echo that made it impossible to locate. "We're stuck. We can't find the way out." "There's someone down here," Derek said. "Someone's in trouble." "That's impossible. No one else is permitted in this section." "Maybe they came in unauthorized. Maybe they've been down here for days." He was already moving toward the voice, picking his way across the breakdown. "We have to help them." "Derek, wait." Chloe hurried after him, her headlamp beam bouncing wildly. "We don't know this section. We could get lost ourselves." "We'll mark our route." He was pulling flagging tape from his pack, tying strips to prominent rocks as he went. "Hello? Keep talking, we're coming to you. Thank you. The voice seemed closer now, or maybe farther away, impossible to tell in the acoustic chaos of the chamber. Thank you. We've been down here so long. They crossed the breakdown field and found another passage leading deeper into the rock. Narrower than the one they'd come through, but passable. Derek tied another flag and kept moving. Behind them, unseen in the darkness, the flagging tape hung motionless in the still air. Then, one by one, the strips began to untie themselves, falling silently to the stone floor and lying there like small orange wounds against the gray limestone. Kevin found the first flag at 0930, just past the point where the Richardson route branched into unmapped territory. A strip of orange tape tied to a boulder, exactly where a competent caver would mark a turn. He photographed it with his helmet camera and keyed his radio. Surface, Kevin. I've got flagging tape at the first major junction off Richardson. They went into the unmapped section. Static. Then, Pi, Evan, signal, braking. He checked his depth. Roughly 300 feet below the surface, well within normal radio range. But the limestone played tricks with signals, creating dead zones and bounce points that shifted with humidity and air pressure. Surface, say again? Back up. 20 minutes, careful. Copy. Proceeding along their marked route. Kevin out. He followed the flags deeper. The passage narrowed, forcing him to crouch, then crawl. His headlamp beam caught another strip of orange tape ahead, but something was wrong. The tape lay on the ground, not tied to anything. He picked it up. The knot was still intact, tied in a loop around nothing, as if whatever it had been secured to had simply ceased to exist. Kevin had been in enough caves to know that tape fell off sometimes. Rocks shifted, knots worked loose. But this tape hadn't fallen from above. It was lying flat, undisturbed, in the middle of the passage. He pushed the thought aside and kept moving. The crawlway opened into a larger space, a room he didn't recognize, filled with breakdown, ceiling lost in darkness overhead. More flags dotted the floor, all of them untied, all of them lying in neat loops, as if carefully removed and placed. Derek? Chloe? His voice echoed back at him from a dozen directions. Park Service, can you hear me? Silence. Then, from somewhere deeper in the room, a sound. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. A pause. 3 more knocks. Kevin's blood went cold. Derek, is that you? Knock twice if you can hear me. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. The same rhythm exactly. Mechanical in its precision. He swept his light across the chamber, searching for the source. The beam found nothing but stone and darkness, the same darkness that seemed to lean in at the edges of his vision, pressing closer whenever he wasn't looking directly at it. I'm coming to you, he called, moving toward the sound. Keep knocking so I can find you. 3 knocks. Closer now. Or maybe not. Distance was meaningless here. Direction a lie the cave told to lure you deeper. He found another passage on the far side of the chamber, smaller than the first, requiring him to belly crawl. The knocking continued, always ahead, always the same rhythm. His elbows scraped against limestone. His pack caught on a projection and he had to back up, turn sideways, force himself through. The passage opened suddenly into a vertical shaft. Kevin stopped at the edge, his headlamp beam falling away into nothing. He grabbed a loose rock and dropped it into the darkness. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, 4, 5. The clatter of impact, impossibly far below. The knocking came again, from the shaft, from the darkness below. Help us. A voice rising from the depths, a man's voice. Derek? Please, we fell, we can't climb out. How far down are you? Please help us. Derek, I need to know how far down. Can you see my light? Silence. Then the knocking again. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. But now it came from behind Kevin as well. From the passage he'd just crawled through. From somewhere in the rock itself. He backed away from the edge of the shaft. The knocking surrounded him now, coming from every direction. From the walls and ceiling and floor. A cacophony of rhythmic tapping that built and built until it was all he could hear. 3 knocks. 3 knocks. 3 knocks. Overlapping. Echoing. Impossible. Kevin ran. He didn't remember the crawlway being so long. He didn't remember the ceiling being so low, scraping against his back, forcing him to flatten himself against the stone and pull forward with his fingernails. The darkness pressed in from all sides, his headlamp beam shrinking, the batteries failing. No, not failing, something else, something drinking the light. He burst into the breakdown chamber and scrambled to his feet. The knocking had stopped. The silence was absolute. His radio crackled. Kevin. Static. Kevin, do you copy? He grabbed the mic with shaking hands. I'm here. I'm in an unmapped chamber off Richardson. I need immediate backup. The cave. He stopped. What could he possibly say? Kevin, we're receiving strange signals from your position, audio interference. It sounds like... A pause. It sounds like someone knocking. Get back up down here. Now. Copy. Team is 10 minutes out. Kevin, what's happening down there? He didn't answer. Because at the far end of the chamber, at the very edge of his headlamp's diminished reach, he could see 2 figures standing motionless in the darkness. A man and a woman. Derek and Chloe. They stood unnaturally still, their headlamps dark, their faces turned toward him. Derek, Chloe, thank God, are you hurt? They didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, 50 feet away, in that absolute stillness that the human body isn't capable of. Can you hear me? The figures tilted their heads, both of them simultaneously at exactly the same angle, an angle that human necks shouldn't achieve. Kevin's light flickered. In the strobe of dying illumination, the figures were closer, 30 feet now. He hadn't seen them move. Help us, Kevin. Chloe's voice, but wrong, the cadence off, the syllables evenly spaced like the knocking. We've been down here so long, we've been waiting for you. His light flickered again, 20 feet. We knew you'd come. They always come. They hear the knocking and they come down to help and then they stay. They all stay, Kevin. Everyone stays. The light died. In the absolute darkness of the deep earth, Kevin heard them moving toward him, heard the scrape of something against stone. Too many limbs, wrong shapes. Things that had learned to wear faces like masks. He heard the knocking start again, from inside the walls, from inside his own skull, a rhythm that had been old when the cave was young. And then, impossibly, his backup light clicked on, the secondary system he'd forgotten about, and the chamber was empty. No figures, no movement, just stone and darkness and silence. Kevin ran for the surface. They found Derek Simmons' body 3 days later at the bottom of the vertical shaft. The fall had killed him instantly. Chloe Vance was discovered 100 yards deeper, in a passage that the rescue team swore hadn't existed on their first sweep. She was curled in a fetal position in a space barely large enough to hold her. Her headlamp was still on, the battery somehow full despite having run for over 70 hours. Her eyes were open. Her mouth was frozen in mid-word. The coroner listed the cause of death as dehydration and exposure. He made no mention of her expression, that look of absolute transcendent terror that the mortician had to work for hours to relax before the family could view the body. Kevin gave his statement. He described finding the flags following them into the unmapped section, hearing sounds that could have been the victims calling for help. He did not describe the knocking. He did not describe the figures he had seen or hadn't seen in his flickering light. He did not describe the way Chloe's voice had sounded, coming from the darkness. That wrong rhythm, those evenly spaced syllables, like something that had learned human speech from listening to echoes. He put in for immediate retirement that afternoon. Medical leave, they called it. Psychological stress following a failed rescue operation. His supervisor approved it without question. Kevin Marsh never entered a cave again. He moved to Kansas, to the flattest part of the flattest state he could find, where the bedrock was granite and the deepest hole was a storm cellar. He slept with the lights on. He filled in the basement of his new house with concrete. Sometimes, late at night, he still heard it. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 knocks. Coming from the walls, from the floor, from somewhere impossibly far below. And sometimes, when the house was very quiet, he heard Chloe's voice. "We've been waiting for you, Kevin. We've been down here so long." The knocking never really stopped. It just learned to be patient. And somewhere beneath the Kentucky hills, in passages that exist on no map, in darkness that has never known light, something continues to tap against the stone. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 knocks. Waiting for the next one to come down. Waiting for the next one to stay. Location: Boneyard Marsh Wildlife Refuge, Louisiana. Date: August 27, 2019. The heat was a living thing in the bayou, pressing against Samantha Reyes's skin like wet cloth even at 9 in the evening. She sat in the aluminum boat at the edge of the refuge's main channel, her spotlight off, her radio quiet, listening to the swamp breathe around her. Cicadas screamed from the cypress trees in waves that rose and fell like fever pulses. Somewhere in the darkness, a bullfrog called out, received no answer, and fell silent. The air smelled of rot and green growth and the particular mineral tang of water that never fully cleared, never fully moved, just sat and waited and remembered everything that had ever drowned in it. August in Boneyard Marsh was not a time for the faint of heart. The refuge covered 18,000 acres of bayou, marsh grass and flooded timber, a labyrinth of channels that shifted with every storm, every flood, every season. Samantha had worked here for 4 years, long enough to know which waterways led somewhere and which curled back on themselves like snakes eating their own tails. Long enough to know the sounds that belonged and the silences that didn't. Long enough to have heard the stories the old Cajun fishing guides told each other when they thought no one from the government was listening. She checked her watch. 9:47 p.m. Her shift ran until 6 a.m., 9 hours of solo patrol through waters that most people had sense enough to avoid after dark. The refuge was officially closed to visitors from sunset to sunrise, but that didn't stop the poachers who came for alligator eggs, the trotliners who set illegal lines for catfish, or the occasional lost tourist whose GPS had led them into a maze they couldn't escape. Samantha's job was to find them, sight them, and guide them out before the swamp found them first. Tonight, though, she was looking for someone specific. Marcus Thibodeau, 43, commercial fisherman out of Houma. His wife had called the refuge station that afternoon, voice tight with controlled panic, saying he'd gone out before dawn to check his crab traps in the eastern channels and hadn't returned. His boat had GPS tracking, required for all permitted fishermen in the refuge, but the signal had stopped transmitting around 2 p.m. Last known coordinates placed him in a section of the marsh the locals called Dead Man's Finger, a narrow channel that wound through some of the oldest cypress stands in the refuge before dead-ending in a tangle of fallen timber and stagnant pools. Samantha had worked with Marcus before. He was one of the good ones, respected the wildlife, followed the regulations, knew the water better than most people knew their own backyards. If his GPS had stopped, it meant equipment failure, which happened. If he hadn't returned by nightfall, it meant something else. She keyed her radio, adjusting the frequency to reach the station. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3, beginning patrol sweep of the eastern channels, starting at marker 7, heading toward the Dead Man's Finger vicinity. Over." The response came scratched with static, normal for this part of the refuge, where the density of vegetation and the mineral content of the water played havoc with radio signals. "Copy that, Unit 3. Be advised, Weather Service has upgraded the tropical disturbance to Tropical Storm Elaine. Expected to make landfall near Morgan City by tomorrow afternoon. Conditions deteriorating overnight. Recommend concluding search by 0300 at latest. Over." "Understood, dispatch. Unit 3 out." Samantha started her outboard motor, keeping the throttle low to navigate the narrow channel. Her spotlight cut a pale cone through the darkness, illuminating the gray-green trunks of cypress trees draped in Spanish moss, the black water sliding past her hull like oil, the occasional pair of red eyes reflecting from the banks where alligators watched her passage with prehistoric patience. She'd stopped being afraid of gators her first month on the job. They were predictable. They followed rules that made sense. Hunger, territory, self-preservation. It was the things that didn't follow rules that kept her awake on nights like this. The channel narrowed as she pushed deeper into the refuge. The cypress trees grew closer together here, their knees jutting from the water like the fingers of drowned giants reaching for air. Spanish moss hung so thick in places that she had to duck, the gray tendrils brushing against her face like the touch of something dead that hadn't accepted its condition. The cicadas had stopped. That was the first thing she noticed. The bullfrogs had stopped. The water moved against her hull with a sound like whispered secrets, and beneath that, beneath everything, a silence so complete it felt like pressure against her eardrums. Samantha slowed the boat to a crawl, sweeping her spotlight in a slow arc. Something was wrong. She couldn't have said what, couldn't have pointed to any specific evidence, but her body knew. 4 years in this swamp had taught her to trust the animal part of her brain, the part that recognized threat before the conscious mind could name it. "Marcus," she called. Her voice fell flat, absorbed by the trees and the water and the heavy air. No echo, no response. "Marcus Thibodeau, this is Wildlife Officer Reyes. Can you hear me?" Nothing. She continued forward, her hand resting on the grip of her sidearm. The channel curved ahead, and as she rounded the bend, her spotlight caught something floating in the water. A boat. Aluminum, maybe 16 feet, listing slightly to one side where water had pooled in the hull. She recognized the registration numbers. Marcus's vessel, the one his wife had described. It was drifting in the center of the channel. No anchor, no lights, no sign of its occupant. Samantha brought her own boat alongside and killed the engine. The silence rushed in to fill the space, thick and waiting. She tied off to the other vessel's cleat and shone her light into the interior. The first thing she saw was the blood. It painted the inside of the hull in arcs and splashes, dark and tacky in the humid air. It covered the bench seats, the tackle box, the cooler that had been torn open with such force that the hinges had bent backward. Deep gouges marked the aluminum sides. Not scratches, not scrapes, but furrows, as if something with claws the size of fishing knives had raked through the metal while trying to get in. Or get out. On the floor of the boat, wedged beneath the center seat, a GoPro camera blinked with a small red light, still recording. Samantha's hands were steady as she reached for the camera. 20 years of training, Army before this, 2 tours in Afghanistan, then law enforcement, then wildlife services when she'd needed something quieter, had taught her how to compartmentalize. Feel later, observe now, document everything. The camera was slippery with blood. She wiped it on her pants and checked the display. 8 hours of footage recorded, battery at 11%. She didn't have time to review it here. She secured it in her vest pocket and continued her survey of the boat. No body. No Marcus. His tackle was still there, his lunch cooler, his cell phone sitting on the bench seat with a cracked screen and a battery long dead. Whatever had happened, he hadn't had time to grab anything, hadn't had time to call for help. The GPS unit was smashed, components scattered across the deck. That explained the signal loss. Not equipment failure. Destruction. A sound reached her across the water. Faint, distant, from somewhere deeper in the channel. A voice. "Help. Please, somebody help me." Samantha's head snapped toward the sound. Male voice. Weak, coming from the direction of Dead Man's finger. "Marcus? Marcus, is that you? Keep talking, I'm coming to you." "Please. I'm hurt. I can't move. Please help me." She cast off from the drifting boat, started her engine, and pushed deeper into the channel. The logical part of her mind was already cataloging the problems with this situation. The blood, the damage, the impossibility of someone surviving whatever had caused it. But the voice was real, was human, was begging for help in the darkness. She'd heard dying men before. This sounded like a dying man. The channel narrowed further until branches scraped both sides of her boat. Her spotlight barely penetrated the darkness ahead. The cypress trees had grown so dense that they formed a canopy overhead, blocking even the faint glow of the clouded sky. The air was different here, thicker, older, carrying a smell that wasn't just swamp rot, something muskier, something that made the primitive part of her brain want to turn around and run. "Help me. Please. I'm so cold." The voice was closer now, just ahead, maybe 50 yards, where the channel opened into a wider pool. Samantha pushed forward, ignoring the scrape of branches against the hull, ignoring the way her skin had broken out in goose flesh despite the 90-degree heat. She emerged into a clearing in the cypress forest, a pool of black water perhaps 100 feet across, surrounded by the skeletal shapes of dead trees that had drowned decades ago when the water levels changed. Moonlight filtered through a gap in the clouds, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. In the center of the pool, standing waist-deep in the water, was a figure. Samantha's spotlight found it, and for a moment, her mind refused to process what she was seeing. It looked like a man. The proportions were mostly right: 2 arms, 2 legs, a head with something like a face. But everything was wrong. The limbs were too long, jointed in places that human anatomy didn't allow. The skin, if it was skin, had a grayish cast, slick with water or something else, covered in patches of coarse hair that stood out against the smooth flesh like fungal growth. The face. The face was Marcus Thibodeau's face. Samantha recognized him from the photo his wife had provided. The same broad forehead, the same thick mustache, the same gap between his front teeth. But the face sat wrong on the skull beneath it, stretched, distorted, like a mask made for a different shape of head. And the eyes that looked at her from that familiar face were not Marcus's eyes. They were yellow, they were hungry. They held an intelligence that was ancient and alien and utterly without mercy. "Help me," the thing said with Marcus's voice. "I'm so cold." And then it smiled with too many teeth. Marcus Thibodeau had known something was wrong the moment he entered Dead Man's Finger that morning. The channel was his regular route. He'd been running it for 15 years, knew every snag and sandbar, every spot where the big catfish liked to congregate. But that morning, the water had felt different, heavier, watching. He'd ignored the feeling. 43 years in these swamps had taught him that imagination was a fisherman's worst enemy. You started jumping at shadows, you'd never get any work done. So he'd motored on, checking his traps, pulling up decent catches of blue crab that would fetch good prices at the market in Houma. Normal morning, normal work. The trouble started when he reached the dead-end pool. He hadn't meant to go that far. The fishing was poor in the stagnant water, and the stories the old-timers told about that place had always made him uneasy. But his GPS had glitched, showing a channel where he knew no channel existed. And by the time he realized the error, he was already in the pool, the standing dead trees surrounding him like grave markers. That was when he heard his mother's voice. "Marcus, Cher, come see what I found." His mother had been dead for 6 years. Heart attack, quick and merciful, in the kitchen of the house where she'd raised 7 children on fish and faith and sheer Cajun stubbornness. He'd held her hand as she went. He'd watched them close the coffin. But her voice came from the trees. Perfect. Complete. Every inflection, every subtle note of the Acadian French that she'd never fully shed even after 60 years in America. "Come see, Cher, it's so beautiful, you have to see." Marcus had reached for his radio. His hands were shaking. He wasn't ashamed to admit that. Something wrong was happening. Something that went beyond equipment glitches and navigation errors. But when he keyed the transmit button, all that came back was static. And beneath the static, so faint he might have imagined it, the sound of his mother laughing. "You used to be braver, Cher. You used to run through these swamps like they belonged to you. What happened? What made you so afraid?" "You're not her," Marcus said. His voice cracked on the words. "Whatever you are, you're not my maman." Silence. The kind of silence that listens. And then from directly behind his boat, close enough to touch, a voice that was not his mother's. A voice that was deep and wet and wrong, like something speaking through a throat not designed for human language. "No, but I remember her. I remember them all. Every soul that ever bled into this water. Every fear. Every prayer. Every last scream. The water remembers, Marcus. And so do I. He spun around. The thing was right there, rising from the black water less than 3 feet from his hull. In the morning light, he could see it clearly. The impossible proportions, the matted fur, the face that shifted and changed like reflections on disturbed water, cycling through features he almost recognized. His mother, his father, his brother who'd drowned at 16 in a storm that had come out of nowhere. All of them, wearing that face like masks it was trying on for size. Marcus grabbed for his knife, a fishing blade, 8 inches, sharp enough to gut a 100-pound catfish. He swung without thinking, felt the blade connect with something that was both solid and yielding, heard a sound like tearing canvas. The thing laughed. It didn't attack immediately. That was what Marcus would remember later, in the brief moments of clarity that remained to him. It could have killed him instantly. He understood that now. Instead, it circled his boat slowly, letting him see it from every angle, letting his mind fully comprehend what he was facing. One clawed hand reached up and traced along the hull, leaving deep furrows in the metal with no more effort than a child dragging a stick through sand. "You're not the one I want," it said. Its voice had settled into something that sounded almost human now. Almost, but not quite. The rhythms were wrong, the pauses in the wrong places. "But you'll do. For now. For bait." It moved faster than anything that size should have been able to move. One moment it was in the water beside the boat. The next it was on top of him, its weight crushing him against the deck, its breath hot and rank against his face. Up close, the yellow eyes held depths that his mind couldn't process, layers of intelligence, of memory, of hunger that stretched back centuries. "Your people have a name for me," it whispered. "Rougarou. Loup-garou, the wolf that walks like a man. But I was here before your people, before their names, before their little god with his little rules. I am what the swamp dreams when it sleeps, and tonight the swamp is hungry." Pain exploded through Marcus's body as claws tore into his shoulder, his chest, his side. He screamed, couldn't help it, couldn't hold it back, and the thing drank in the sound like wine. "Scream louder," it said. "She needs to hear you. She needs to come." She. The thing wasn't hunting him. It was hunting someone else. He was just the lure. Marcus felt his blood running hot across the deck, felt his vision beginning to narrow at the edges. The GoPro on his vest was still running. He'd turned it on that morning to record his catch, to show his grandchildren, and some part of his fading consciousness hoped that whoever found it would understand, would know what was out here, would stay away. "Tell me your sins," the thing said almost gently. "Tell me what you carry. I want to know who you are before I wear your face." Marcus closed his eyes. His lips moved in a prayer his mother had taught him, words in a French older than Louisiana, older than America, a prayer against the loup-garou that the Acadians had brought with them across the ocean because they knew, they had always known, that some monsters followed you wherever you went. The thing laughed again. "That won't save you, Cher," it said in his mother's voice. "Nothing saves anyone out here. The water always wins." Samantha's gun was in her hand before conscious thought caught up with instinct. She fired 3 times, center mass the way she'd been trained, and watched the bullet strike the creature in the chest without effect. It didn't flinch, didn't bleed, just kept smiling with Marcus Thibodeau's stolen face. "That tickles," it said. "Do it again." She threw the boat into reverse, but the engine coughed and died. Flooded. The curse of these old outboards in humid conditions. She pulled the starter cord once, twice, 3 times, nothing. The thing began wading toward her in no hurry, its long arms trailing through the water like the limbs of a wading bird. "Where are you going, Cher? We're just getting acquainted." Samantha's mind raced through options. Her rifle was in the locked case under her seat. No time to get it. The radio was useless this deep in the swamp. She had a knife, a flare gun, and 20 years of survival training against something that had just shrugged off hollow point rounds like mosquito bites. The flare gun. She grabbed it from the emergency kit, aimed at the creature's chest and fired. The magnesium charge struck the matted fur and ignited with a white-hot flash. The thing screamed, a sound that was nothing human, that echoed across the water and sent birds erupting from trees half a mile away. It staggered backward, flames spreading across its torso, clawing at itself with those impossibly long arms. But even as it burned, it was still smiling. "Fire," it said, almost admiringly. "Your people learned that trick 1,000 years ago. It hurts. It always hurts. But it doesn't stop me, Cher. Nothing stops me." The flames were dying. The coarse hair that covered its body was burning away, revealing grayish skin beneath that seemed to absorb the fire, rather than be consumed by it. Samantha had maybe 30 seconds before it recovered. She grabbed her paddle and pushed off from the bank, driving her boat toward the channel she'd come through. The exit was 50 yards away. If she could make the current, if she could get the engine started, if she could reach the main channel where her radio might work. The thing exploded out of the water directly in front of her. It landed on the bow of her boat, its weight driving the front underwater, black water flooding over the deck. Up close, its face had stopped pretending to be Marcus. The features had melted into something older, something that belonged to no human lineage. A muzzle like a wolf's but wrong, teeth that interlocked in patterns no mammal had ever evolved. "I've been waiting for you," it said. "I've been waiting so long. You have something I need, something I can taste in your blood." Its clawed hand shot forward and grabbed her vest, lifting her off her feet like she weighed nothing. This close she could smell it, rot and musk and something copper-bright that might have been blood. Its yellow eyes fixed on hers with terrible intelligence. "You carry guilt," it whispered. "So much guilt. All those people you couldn't save. All those orders you followed that you knew were wrong. I can feel it in you, Cher. It's delicious. It's exactly what I need." The curse. The stories she'd half listened to. The old Cajun guides talking about the Rougarou and its rules. It chose its victims based on sin. Those who had broken faith, broken vows, carried weight that bent their souls. The curse passed from person to person, but only to those who were worthy of it. "The water remembers," the thing said, "and soon you will too." It opened its mouth, wider than any human mouth could open, wider than any wolf's, and lunged for her throat. Samantha's knife was in her hand. She didn't remember drawing it. The blade punched into the creature's eye, the right one, the yellow one, and buried itself to the hilt. The thing shrieked and released her, staggering backward off the boat, clawing at the knife protruding from its socket. She didn't wait to see if it recovered. She threw herself at the engine, pulled the starter cord with every ounce of strength she had left. Once, twice. On the third pull, it caught. The outboard roared to life and she slammed the throttle forward, driving the boat toward the channel, branches whipping against her face, Spanish moss tearing at her clothes. Behind her, over the sound of the engine, she heard it screaming. And then, worse than the screaming, she heard it laughing. "Run, Cher. Run as far as you can. The water reaches everywhere. And so do I. I'll see you again, Samantha Reyes. I'll see you in your dreams." She didn't stop until she reached the station. The boat barely made it. The hull was half flooded, the engine sputtering on fumes. Dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and orange that looked too much like fire. The GoPro footage showed everything. 8 hours of recording, most of it mundane. Marcus checking traps, Marcus eating his lunch, Marcus singing along to a radio that had stopped working an hour into his trip. And then the last 40 minutes. Samantha watched it once in the station office with the doors locked and all the lights on. She watched Marcus die. Watched the thing that killed him wear his face like a mask. Watched it look directly at the camera and smile. "She's coming," it said in Marcus's voice. "I can smell her guilt from here. Tell her I'm waiting. Tell her the water never forgets." The official report listed Marcus Thibodeau's death as an alligator attack under unusual circumstances. The footage was classified not because anyone in Washington believed the truth, but because no one wanted to explain why they couldn't. Samantha was offered medical leave. She declined. She still works the night shift at Boneyard Marsh. She still patrols the eastern channels, although she never goes as far as Dead Man's Finger. Some nights, when the heat sits heavy and the cicadas fall silent for no reason she can explain, she hears voices calling from the water. Her mother's voice, her sergeant's voice from Afghanistan, Marcus Thibodeau's voice asking her why she left him, why she didn't save him, why she ran. She doesn't answer anymore. She knows what's calling. But sometimes, in the hour before dawn, when the darkness is thickest and the water is still, she catches herself looking toward that dead-end channel, wondering if the thing is still there, wondering if it's still waiting, wondering when she'll be guilty enough to go back. The knife she'd buried in its eye was never found. Neither was its body, if something like that even leaves a body behind. But last month, a fisherman reported finding a rusted blade in his net, pulled up from the deepest part of the channel, 8 inches long, sharp enough to gut a 100-pound catfish, sharp enough to have cut something that doesn't bleed. Samantha keeps the knife in her desk drawer now. She tells herself it's evidence. She tells herself it's protection. But sometimes, late at night, she swears she can feel it calling to her. A pull in her chest like hunger, like guilt, like the water, remembering.